Welcome to the Sleeping Walk. Special guest Michael Moore and Bowling for Palestine.
And the Oscar goes to Bowling for
Palestine.
Michael Moore and Michael Donovan.
This is the first Academy Award and nomination for Michael Moore and Michael Donovan.
And the Sleeping Walk. This could be us, Michael. This could be us.
On behalf of our producers, Kathleen Glynn and Michael Donovan from Canada, I'd like to thank the Academy for this. I've invited my fellow documentary nominees on the stage with us.
An Oscar-nominated documentary filmmaker got less than a warm welcome when he arrived in Los Angeles for this week's celebrations. Homeland Security actually threatened to deport him. Take a look. This is video from the documentary 5 Broken Cameras about Israeli occupation. It was shot by Imad Burnat, who is a farmer on the West Bank. When Burnat arrived at LAX, the airport in LA, security problems arose until filmmaker Michael Moore intervened.
Because we like nonfiction. We like nonfiction and we live in fictitious times.
He's an olive farmer.
Me honest bridge seller too, Michael.
So I think the Homeland Security person was trying to process that. Okay, you're a farmer, you're Palestinian, oh, and you're an Oscar nominee. Right. And I'm nominated for the Nobel Prize.
Truth stranger than fiction sometime. Burnat's film is entitled, as we mentioned, 5 Broken Cameras, because he lost that many cameras trying to report on the strife in his village. It is the first Palestinian documentary ever to be nominated for an Oscar.
I mean, what's great about the democracy and free speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of not having a state religion. This is what those who came. To find at these college demonstrations one Hamas flag that the protesters were carrying, and there were none. This is all a made-up thing. Just like I said, the river to the sea. Can I just read? This is from the charter of the Likud party. That's the right-wing party that Netanyahu is the head of. 1977, I'm reading direct quote from the charter of the Likud right-wing Israeli party. And it says the following: the right of the Jewish people to the land of Israel is eternal and indisputable. Between the sea and the Jordan, there will only be Israeli sovereignty. That's their own charter, the Likud party. That's where this river to the sea, because the real victims in these last decades have been the Palestinian people not being able to have their freedom, not being able to live in a democracy, not having their rights.
Yeah.
And why so many Jewish students are joining with Palestinian students, because they know it's wrong too. That's why the majority, I think, of Israelis certainly want Netanyahu out of there. Your own polls have shown that.
Well, I want to ask you.
And I think that. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up polls. And one, I should say that it is happening on some campuses. We saw the one student who was barred from campus after he said in a video in January that all Zionists should be killed, or that Zionists should be killed. That was something that was spread around. And I understand, obviously, it's complicated, and schools clearly are grappling with how to handle this.
Yeah, and that kid's a knucklehead, and he's now apologized for President Biden, and you know this. And I speak to you as a fellow seminarian to the Catholic priesthood, that's me, that this is wrong. This is not what we believe in. And I think, after World War II, we are all in the shadow of the Holocaust. We are all sons and daughters of that era. And what did we want to do? We wanted to make sure that no Jew would ever have to suffer again or be killed again. And so everybody got behind the idea that they should have this home. But the land wasn't taken from the Nazis, the Germans. We didn't give them Bavaria. We took land from people who, not a single Palestinian built an oven at Auschwitz. Not a single Palestinian historically ran the Spanish Inquisition. Not a single Palestinian turned away boatloads of German Jewish refugees that tried to dock in Boston, New York, Miami, prohibited, trying to escape before they were all exterminated.
Other attacks on the Jewish community in 1920, 1921, 1929 were instigated by a call of the Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin Al-Husseini, who was later sought for war crimes in the Nuremberg trials because he had a central role in fomenting the final solution. He flew to Berlin. Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time. He wanted to expel the Jews. And Hajj Amin Al-Husseini went to Hitler and said, if you expel them, they'll all come here. So what should I do with them? He asked. You said, burn them.
Francisco Gil-White is an anthropologist, a historian, and a political scientist, and he's the creator of the popular newsletter and online course, Management of Reality, where he's building a system of articles and historical and investigative research covering topics in politics, foreign affairs, corruption, the fight for democracy, and more. And he's been doing a deep dive into what's happening with the Israeli-Palestinian war, and so he's going to share a truth, some starking truths about that conflict with us. So Francisco, thank you for joining me today. But the first one is regarding your trajectory. I know that you were on track for tenure in UPenn, and if you're comfortable with with me and with my audience, would you like to share why did UPenn shut down your track to tenure, and what was this truth that you somehow found that not other people were talking about?
Well, actually, that's an excellent segue from what I was just saying, because when I started getting very interested in the Arab-Israeli conflict, one of the thing, and this is the other turning point, I guess, I found I should make clear, I'm not the first one to find this. It's not an original discovery of mine. I mean, I went into the library and started looking up stuff on the history of the Arab-Palestinian conflict. And I discovered that all of this was already documented. It was all in the library. The Arab-Palestinian movement was created by the same people who carried out the Nazi extermination of the European Jews during World War II. The founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement is this guy called Amin Al-Husseini, who was very, very extremely famous, world famous in the first half of the 20th century, and even still immediately after the war, certainly very famous. But now in the West, and in the West, he was famous in the West as well as the Muslim world. But now, after World War II, a few years after World War II, the media stopped talking about him. They just dropped the subject of Husseini completely. And after a few decades in the West, nobody could remember him because that's how I found this is how cultural memory works in the modern world. So if the media stops talking about something, it's almost as if they had erased it. They don't need to censor anything. They don't need to go into the libraries and remove anything. They just stop mentioning it, and it disappears from the consciousness of millions of people. But this guy Husseini, who is now largely forgotten by Westerners, was as important as Adolf Hitler. That's the kind of person we're talking about. Yeah, it was very important. He founded the Palestinian movement in 1919, something like that, and he was responsible for big terrorist attacks against the Jews living in British Mandate Palestine. And that history is interesting, but I'm going to skip it. But there were huge terrorist attacks organized by him. And he became the great Mufti of Jerusalem. He was made great Mufti of Jerusalem by the British government, the colonial British government that was controlling the British Mandate Palestine. And from that position, he organized these terrorist attacks. And then the biggest one was called the Arab Revolt. It went from 1936 to 1939. It ended with the outbreak of World War II. Husseini had created such tremendous chaos and violence in British Mandate Palestine that the British finally intervened. So he left. He went to Iraq. In Iraq, he was. You have to understand, this guy had enormous prestige all over the Muslim world. He was an internationally known figure. Very respected among many Muslim leaders for his attacks against the Jews in Mandate Palestine. And when he went to Iraq, he was treated as if he were some kind of official leader of Muslims, something like that. So they gave him, a budget. He became almost like a cabinet minister. And he started ordering people about and organized the Farhud, which is a gigantic pogrom of the Jews of Baghdad that pretty much ended Jewish life in Baghdad. Edwin Black, a very important historian, has a very good book on this event. And after doing that, Husseini went on to Italy, where Mussolini received him as if he were a head of state. The fascists were very interested in Husseini and in making an alliance with Husseini, because they were making important alliances with all kinds of rulers and leaders in the Muslim world. The Nazis had an extensive system of diplomacy and alliance with Muslim leaders. And so Husseini was very interesting to them because Husseini was so famous and had such high prestige all over the Muslim world that many people thought he was going to be the next caliph. Okay, so they received, when Husseini arrived in Rome, Mussolini received him like a head of state, and with all the pomp and circumstance. And then Husseini went on to Berlin, where he was again received like a head of state. Hitler himself came out to receive him with all the dignitaries and the cameras flashing and the film rolling. They treated it as a tremendous event, and Hitler sat down to talk to him for a while. They came to some very important agreements. Your viewers can go see this. It's all over the internet. They can go to my YouTube channel, The Management of Reality, and see the footage of Husseini meeting Hitler, because we have a short documentary on the history of Husseini and everything else. So they can see it there now. And they agreed, Husseini and Hitler, that they would exterminate the Israeli, they weren't Israelis yet, the Jews living in British Mandate Palestine. They would ethnically cleanse the Middle East of Jews. That was their agreement. They would collaborate together to do that. Now, they couldn't do that because the Nazis were stopped at El Alamein in Egypt. So the Nazis never got to Jerusalem. But the consolation prize for Husseini was that he stayed in the orbit in the Nazi-occupied Europe for the rest of the war. He was very important to the Nazis. They gave him an entire bureaucracy. It was called Bureau des Gros Mufti. They gave him a budget, and he started doing all kinds of things. He was very prominent in Nazi propaganda, inciting Muslims to kill Jews. Muslims allied with the Nazis, for example, in Bosnia and Kosovo. He organized entire divisions of Heinrich Himmler's SS that participated in the Yugoslav chapter of the Holocaust, killing Serbs, Jews, and Roma, the people we often call gypsies. And that was already bad enough. I mean, so he was, that marks him off as a leader of the Holocaust, as an organizer of the Holocaust. But it gets worse because after the war, the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal was doing all kinds of investigations, and one of those investigations, a very important one, concerned the interrogation of Dieter Wisliczeny, or Wisliczeny, I never know exactly how to pronounce it. He was a Czechoslovak who was a right-hand man to Adolf Eichmann. Now, Adolf Eichmann is the recognized director of the death camp system, of the Final Solution, and according to him, he was executed by the Nuremberg Tribunal proceedings. But before he was executed for his war crimes and crimes against humanity, Wisliczeny testified to a bunch of things because he was interviewed very extensively by the prosecutors. And they considered him a very good witness in the sense that he was very meticulous in giving them all kinds of detailed answers to their questions. And he corrected many things that they thought that were mistaken, and they were able to corroborate his corrections and so forth. So this is a very careful witness, somebody who was executed because he was an evil bastard, but who in the last minute of his life decided to be a good witness, and he was a good witness. And what he said about Al-Husseini was that Husseini had become, immediately after arriving in Berlin, Husseini arrived in Berlin in late October 1941, and he said that Husseini was the one who had convinced them to switch from a policy of expulsion to a policy of complete extermination. Wow. Okay, so that's one thing Wisliczeny said. He said, and historians agree that up until the autumn of 1941, which is when Husseini arrived in Berlin, Up until then, although the Nazis were killing many, many Jews, this is true, they had already begun killing many Jews, but they still had a policy of expelling most Jews from the Nazi-occupied area. And they had not yet decided to kill all Jews. That decision was taken in the Wannsee Conference, which is January of 1942, which is after Husseini had already been among them for several months. And according to Wislicenny, he's the one who convinced them that they had to kill them all, according to Husseini, because they couldn't go to his Palestine. You see, he couldn't contemplate the Jews coming to Palestine, and the Nazis ended up agreeing with him that they should all be killed. So, according to Wislicenny, this is what Husseini did, and also he became Eichmann's best friend, and together with Eichmann, according to Husseini, according to Wislicenny, Husseini and Eichmann together organized and directed the entire death camp system. So the father of the Palestinian movement is also the man responsible, with Eichmann and Hitler and Himmler, of murdering the European Jewish population.
And condolences to everyone who's died, first on October 7th. Just nobody who's Jewish should have to spend another day on this earth. I want to say to people survival. In Gaza, anybody who's holding hostages, release them. Release them now.
And anytime you've got the Pope and the Dixie Chicks against you, your time is up.